When people think of a sleep story for grown-ups, they often imagine soft voices, gentle imagery, and peaceful scenery. But sometimes, the most restful stories are the ones that carry you somewhere entirely unexpected, somewhere quiet and forgotten, where mystery is wrapped in moonlight and time moves slower than breath. This is one of those stories. Far beyond the cities, tucked between rolling hills and wrapped in a cloak of ever mist, there lies a lake that doesn't appear on modern maps. Some say it once did centuries ago, but it faded from ink and memory, like so many of the world's most wondrous secrets. The locals call it Lake Viridia, and they speak of it rarely, as if even the name should be whispered only after sunset. The lake itself is impossibly still, as if it is listening. Its surface reflects the moon so clearly that nighttime visitors often think they're staring into another sky altogether. But what lies beneath that mirrored water is what makes this a true sleep story for grown-ups. Because beneath Lake Viridia, hidden far below the lily pads and drifting shadows, is a forgotten library. It's not a sunken ruin or a relic drowned by time. No, it was built there on purpose. The story begins not with the library, but with a man named Thalen Gray. He was neither young nor old, though his eyes held the weight of both ages. Thalen had spent his life cataloging books for ancient collections. Quiet work in dusty halls, shuffling between scrolls and forgotten volumes, with cracked leather covers. He wasn't unhappy, not exactly, but he lived his life like someone standing in a room full of music, listening only to the silence. Then came the letter. It arrived by hand, sealed in green wax, and smelling faintly of lavender and rain. There was no return address, just a single sentence inside. Come to the lake. The library is waking. He should have thrown it away, or laughed, or dismissed it as some eccentric joke. But something about the phrasing stirred a part of him that hadn't been stirred in years. A quiet ache behind the ribs, where wonder used to live. That night, he packed a bag, a coat, a notebook, a pen, and without telling anyone, he boarded the next train, heading east. The journey was long, but comforting. The train hummed and swayed like a lullaby. He passed towns where lights blinked sleepily in windows, and fields of tall grass that danced in the moonlight. By the time he reached the small station nearest to the lake, morning mist was just beginning to rise from the earth. Thalen walked for miles until the trees grew older, taller, closer together, like elders guarding something sacred. Then finally, as if the forest had stepped aside, he found it, Lake Viridia. It was more beautiful than he imagined, more still, more alive, and standing at the edge he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Anticipation, not for answers or explanations, but for the feeling itself, the hush before a page turns, the pause between heartbeats, the soft pull of mystery. As the fog lifted slightly, Thalen noticed a rowboat waiting at the shore, unchained, undisturbed. Inside it, a lantern sat unlit, and a book lay closed, with no title on its cover. He didn't question it. He stepped in. The oars were worn smooth, as if shaped by centuries of hands. With each gentle row, the lake shimmered and parted around him. The air was cooler here, more fragrant, somewhere between old paper and wild mint. When he reached the lake's center, the boat stopped on its own. The lantern sparked to life, and the water began to swirl. It wasn't loud nor fast, but graceful, like the slow opening of a spiral-bound secret. At first, Thalen thought he was dreaming, but then the light from the lantern bent downward, revealing something that stole his breath. A staircase, spiraling down into the lake, dry, illuminated, waiting. He stepped out of the boat and onto the first step. His feet stayed dry. The water curved above him, forming a transparent dome that shimmered with color as he descended. The silence was warm, not hollow. Each step hummed with a soft vibration, as though the stone itself remembered footsteps. Thelen kept walking, down and down, as the daylight above faded to a twilight blue. At the base of the staircase, a door emerged from the lake floor, carved from deep wood, framed in brass, and etched with unreadable symbols that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. He touched the handle, and the door opened without a sound. Inside, it was breathtaking. The library beneath the lake was a cathedral of books, where shelves arched like tree limbs and staircases floated midair, spiraling toward nowhere. Lanterns hovered along the aisles like fireflies trapped in amber. The air smelled of ink, sea salt, and something else, something ancient and kind. He stood there for what felt like hours. Maybe it was. Time didn't behave normally in this place. Every book had no title. Yet, as Thalen reached out and opened one, the pages shifted to reveal a story he didn't remember living, but had somehow experienced. A childhood dream. A moment in a cafe 20 years ago. A strange conversation on a rainy platform. Each book, it seemed, was a memory, but not just his. He realized then this was no ordinary library. This was a library of lives, and he, by stepping inside, had become part of it. The further he wandered, the more the library seemed to change. Shelves rearranged themselves silently. Passageways opened with a thought. A chair would appear just as he grew tired. A cup of tea, warm and honey-sweet, waited on a side table with no sign of who placed it. And then he found the central chamber, a round room with glass walls, looking out at the underwater world beyond, where fish glowed like stardust and distant shapes moved slowly through blue shadows. In the center of this room sat a woman, or at least something that looked like one. She was reading. As Thalen approached, she looked up and smiled, not with surprise, but recognition. "You've come," she said. He nodded, unsure of what to say. She gestured to the chair across from her. "This is a place for those who carry too many forgotten stories. And you, Thalen Gray, have brought more than most." "How do you know my name?" he asked, voice soft as the walls. She opened the book in her hands. It was his. From the coverless volumes lining the shelves to the hushed air that greeted each breath, this was more than a resting place. It was a sanctuary of self, a reflection of all the stories grown-ups forget in the noise of daily life. This was a place to remember them, to rest, to breathe. And as Thalen sat across from her, the flickering lantern swayed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He wasn't worried. He wasn't rushing. For the first time in years, he wasn't anywhere else but here. And all around him The books began to whisper, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to remind him, you are not lost. You're only waiting to be still. If you've ever fallen asleep to the sound of turning pages, you'll understand what happened next. Thailand sat across from the strange woman who seemed to know everything about him, even the parts he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Around them, the walls of the underwater library glowed with the softest, palest gold, like moonlight poured through sea glass. The water outside pressed gently against the crystal windows, but no noise reached them, just the hush of sanctuary and story. Studied her in the silence. Her hair shimmered like kelp caught in light. Her eyes were the color of polished stone, gray but not cold. Her clothing seemed to change depending on the angle he looked at it. At times, a cloak, at times, a robe, and sometimes it seemed woven from letters themselves. And yet, she looked entirely human, entirely present, entirely peaceful. You're wondering what this place really is, she said, closing the book in her lap. I suppose I am, Thailand admitted. And whether you're dreaming, yes, he said. That too. She nodded, almost approvingly. That's good. Wonder is the doorway. Curiosity is the key. They sat in companionable silence as a light breeze moved through the circular chamber, though there were no windows, no vents. The library was alive, clearly, but it didn't demand attention. It waited. It breathed. It allowed space. Every soul has a library, she said after a while. But most grow dusty with time. People forget their memories, bury their hopes, silence their questions. Eventually, their shelves are quiet. She stood and moved slowly to the far wall, where the glass overlooked a great underwater canyon filled with light. But some, like you, still carry wonder. Though it's buried, some hear the call of lost stories. Thalen followed her gaze. In the distance, a shape moved, a massive shadow that drifted through the canyon like a whale made of thought. It wasn't frightening. It was majestic, a being that did not require a name to be known. What is that? He whispered. She smiled, not turning. A librarian. Thalen raised an eyebrow. I thought you were the librarian. I'm a guide, a guardian. I help visitors remember how to read their own stories. But that, she nodded toward the shape in the deep, that is a true librarian, the keeper of ancient volumes. It carries the dreams of cities long forgotten. It remembers the sounds of extinct languages. It knows the name of every tree that has ever lived. Thalen felt the hairs on his arms lift, and yet he felt no fear, only awe. The woman turned back toward him. Would you like to walk the halls, or rest a while? I want to understand, he said gently. Everything. She didn't laugh, but the corners of her mouth twitched as if she wanted to. Then let's begin with your story. She led him through a corridor lined with tall silver doors. Each had no label, but glowed differently, as though lit from within by colored fireflies. She stopped at one with a soft violet hue and placed her palm on the frame. The door dissolved into mist. Inside was a room made entirely of memory. It wasn't an abstract concept. It was tangible. He could see a table from his childhood, with a chipped corner and pencil marks from his earliest attempts at writing. There was a train ticket from a journey he had taken after college, one that ended in heartbreak, but also in strength. He saw his father's hat, the smell of old tobacco, the feel of rough hands that had once held his own as they crossed the street. He stood there, utterly still. It was as though someone had collected the moments that mattered and gently arranged them into a room without time. "This is your root room," the woman said softly beside him, "where the story begins, where identity is planted." He blinked. "I didn't realize I remembered all this." "No one does," she replied, "until they stop running." They left the room, and she touched another door. This one glowed with a soft orange hue, like sunrise through curtains. Inside was a long corridor filled with mirrors. In each, he saw himself, but differently. One showed him laughing without care, eyes crinkled, arms full of books. Another showed him older, calmer, living in a small home by the sea, writing letters to strangers. Still another showed him as a boy, holding a magnifying glass over a beetle, filled with awe and questions. "These are the chapters you might live," the woman whispered, "the ones still unwritten." He turned, surprised. "You mean I have a choice?" She met his gaze. "Always." As they moved deeper into the library, things grew stranger, more beautiful, more surreal. They crossed a bridge made of old poetry, the stanzas glowing beneath their feet. They entered a room where dreams were stored in glass globes, spinning slowly on invisible currents. They passed a hallway where every breath created a new constellation, blinking gently above their heads. All the while, the woman, who still had not given her name, explained in soft tones, "This place is made of story, your story, but also the stories you've touched, every life you've changed, even briefly, every time you listened, every time you looked at the moon and wondered." Thalen felt small, but not unimportant, more like a note in a vast song. And yet, something tugged at him, a question forming slowly, like steam curling from a mug. At last, they reached a final chamber. It was different, cold, quiet. At the center sat a book, much larger than the others, bound in dark leather, locked with 3 silver clasps. "What is that one?" he asked. The woman's face grew still. "That is the forgotten chapter." He stepped closer. The room dimmed. "I don't remember this one," he murmured. "No," she said. "You buried it." "Why?" "Because it hurt." He swallowed. Something in his chest tightened. Slowly he reached for the book, but the woman's hand stopped his. "Not yet," she said. "You must be ready." Thalen looked into her eyes, and for the first time saw pain behind them, not just for him, but for all the people who'd ever stood in this room with books they couldn't yet open. "When will I be ready?" he whispered. "When you remember that pain is part of the story, not the end of it." She guided him gently out of the room and back through the glowing corridors. As they walked, he felt lighter, not because he had answers, but because he now understood the beauty of not knowing everything, of being part of something larger, of remembering himself again, not just as a man, but as a story. They returned to the central chamber where the lanterns still hovered and tea waited, fresh and warm. Thalen sat once more across from the guide. He sipped slowly, and for the first time in years, he smiled without thinking. Outside, the librarian moved again, gliding gracefully through the water. The library hummed softly, like a lullaby written by memory itself. Thalen leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, and all around him the stories whispered, "You are safe here. You are remembered. You are becoming." The tea was warm and steadying, gently perfumed with a hint of lavender and something sweeter, perhaps honey spun from starlight. Thalen sat quietly, holding the cup with both hands, letting the silence wash over him like a tide. He had wandered through memories and might-have-beens. He had touched forgotten pages of his own life. He had seen the book he had locked away, and though it remained closed, he no longer feared it, not as much. "Every story changes when it is witnessed," the woman said softly, still seated across from him. Her eyes reflected candlelight and something deeper, something infinite. Thalen nodded. "And mine is still being written." She smiled gently. "Yes, by you." He looked out through the great crystal window again. The water beyond shimmered with movement. The librarian had returned, closer this time. It glided just beyond the barrier, a massive shape etched with glowing runes, slow and thoughtful. And then something unexpected happened. The librarian paused and turned its great eye toward him. It was not a human eye. It was vast and unknowable, yet entirely without malice. In fact, it was kind. A warmth passed through Thalen, one that had no name, like sunlight fell through closed eyelids, or the gentle weight of a blanket pulled up in childhood by a parent's hand. He wasn't being judged. He was being seen, not for who he pretended to be, but for who he was. Every wound, every joy, every quiet hope. And in that gaze, Thalen felt something settle, a knowing. He didn't speak, neither did the librarian, but something passed between them, an understanding older than words. The creature drifted backward, slowly vanishing into the dark water once again, leaving behind a trace of light that shimmered like gold dust in the tide. Thalen exhaled deeply and fully, as if he had been holding his breath his entire life. He turned to the guide. "What happens now?" She rose and walked to a nearby shelf. Carefully, she pulled out a small book, much smaller than the others. Simple binding, soft blue cover, no title. She handed it to him. "This is the next page." He opened it. Inside was a single phrase. "Begin again." He looked up, surprised. "That's it." She laughed quietly, like rain tapping against a glass. For now, he felt the weight of the book in his hands. It was light, almost too light, but the words pressed into his thoughts like a warm imprint, echoing silently. Begin again. Not with pressure, not with panic, but with permission. She led him once more through the corridors, which had changed subtly in color. Deeper, warmer, the golden hues had turned slightly rosy, as though a sunrise were approaching somewhere far beyond the lake. They came to a tall archway framed by vines of ink. She touched it, and it shimmered open into a hallway that seemed familiar. Thalen paused. Is this? She nodded. The way back. He hesitated, then asked, Will I remember? She tilted her head. Not everything, not clearly, but enough. And the rest will whisper back to you when you need it. He stepped into the archway. The air grew thicker, humming gently. The world began to soften, like pages turning in reverse. The library faded behind him, but the peace did not. He felt it settle in his bones, not like a memory, but like something he had always known and only just recalled. And then he woke up in his own bed. The morning was quiet. Outside, the first light of dawn stretched across the sky, pale gold and soft pink, like brush strokes on silk. Thalen sat up slowly, feeling the sheets cool against his skin. There was no library, no floating lanterns, no ancient guide, but something had changed. Not everything, but just enough. On his bedside table lay a book he didn't remember placing there. Small, simple, blue cover. No title. He opened it. There was only one phrase inside. Begin again. So he did. He stood, stretched, and walked barefoot to the window. The world outside waited, unwritten, humming with quiet possibility. And as he breathed in the morning air, he smiled softly, knowing the library beneath the lake was real, because stories live wherever we remember them, and sleep is only the beginning. The end.